Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video where today we're going to be focusing again on some stuff you can do in resource packs. Today our focus is going to be on doing animations for eating, whether that's in the 2D sprite or even in the model. This will of course build a little bit on information that was shared in our last resource pack video where we talked about custom item model generation and model definitions for the new system. So if you are needing a little refresher, that's also a good video to watch, but we'll recover a lot of that here. But to get us started, let's go ahead and hop over into Blockbench where we'll take a look at our models that we've created for today's demonstration. Here in Blockbench, you can see that today we're going to be working with 6 different models, and 4 of these are going to be for our animation. So you can see these as like frames of the animation as it gets eaten. And then these 2 are going to dictate what the COD model looks like when it's in our hand without eating, and what it'll look like in our GUI. It's important to have a version like this, even though these models look the same. It's going to be important in our display. If you look at our eating, the difference between this as a frame 1 of our eating animation and this, where it's a little lower down and off screen. I opted to make this choice intentionally so that it looks like this when we're eating instead of this. So to put that more simply, having a different model for a frame of our animation versus the default just holding it in our hand allows us some freedom to control what those look like in display. If we were to use cook cod eat 0 as our just standard holding in hand model, you would see that it looks like this when it's just in our hand, which is not what we want. And just like last episode, this is not going to be really a Blockbench tutorial, but I will just kind of show you what I did. The idea I had was that for COD, I wanted basically the skin to be eaten away with the bones to be left underneath. And so I progressively removed more of an outer layer and revealed more of an underlayer of that skeleton until all you're left with is the skeleton. And then that's the end of the animation before it loops again or the food is consumed. Now, just to show where those models are being saved, we're here at the root of our resource pack that we made last episode. And we're going to go here into Assets, Minecraft, and Models, Item. And then here, you can either save things right into this folder here, or you can make a subfolder for it. I opted to make a subfolder. It's not important which way you do it. You just need to know that you're doing it intentionally, because it will matter if you put stuff into a folder later when we're defining things in our JSON files. So here I have my cook salmon models all inside of this eat folder, where you can see we have those same ones we saw in Blockbench. We have eat 0, 1, 2, and 3, as well as our COD in hand model and COD in GUI model, which I'm calling 2D. Equally, if we go back to the root of our folder, I'm going to show you where I've saved the textures that I'm using for those models. And we're going to make a mirroring folder that is also called eat, but instead of it being in models item, it's going to be in textures item. So you can see that we've saved cook cod in hand and cook cod, which are the only 2 textures that we're using, because I've included the skeleton texture in the cook cod so that they're using the same texture sheet. The last thing we need to set up is where our item model definition file is going to be. So I took you back here to the root of our resource pack. We're going to go into Assets, Minecraft, and then this time we're going to go into a folder called Items, and you want to save a .json here, cooked_cod.json, which is where we're going to be covering all of the work we're going to be doing today. So now here we are in Notepad to look at that cooked_cod.json file that I've created already for you here. And just like last time, I'm going to first run you through kind of the logic of how it all works, but then we'll rebuild this together so that you guys can follow more line by line. So the way to read this file is basically it's saying that in the context of the GUI or the ground, we want to use the cook cod 2D sprite. But when that is not satisfied, we're going to fall back to doing a use item property. And when the item is being used, we're going to call different models based on how many ticks have gone by. So because I have 4 frames of my animation and I know that food in game takes 32 ticks to eat, I divided 32 by 4 and got 8. So you can see that we're starting at 0 because we want this to be the very first frame of our animation as soon as we start eating. And then every new frame, we add 8 to our threshold. So it goes 0, 8, 16, 24. And then this will be the last frame of our animation before the food is consumed. So we don't actually ever get to 32 as a threshold. So on true, we have frame 1 of our animation at 0 ticks, frame 2 of our animation at 8 ticks, frame 3 of our animation at 16 ticks, frame 4 at 24 ticks, and then once that is done, the food is consumed, and it would start over again if you're eating a second piece of food. You also want to include the final frame of your animation in the fallback for the on true, just so that there's no hiccups, because then basically it is saying it will continue to use that final frame of the animation until eating or using the item is completed. In the case where using the item is false, we want to use our cook cod hand model. And just as a caveat to discuss what I mentioned earlier, this is where it's going to matter whether you did or did not put your models into a folder structure, because you can see here that I put my models into item eat cooked cod. That is what this is. This is actually looking for the model in that location. If you don't end up putting yours in a folder, you would just totally remove this eat section, just like that. Or if you named it something else besides eat, you would just replace that name eat with whatever you named your folder. Now, just like last time, I'm going to show you guys how we're going to go about doing this on my favorite website for this kind of stuff, Misode. I'll leave a link to this in the description like I did in the last video, but this is a really helpful tool for when you're writing item model definitions, when you kind of understand the logic of what you want, but you don't have to worry so much about the syntax and all of the where the commas and where the brackets go. So in this case, we know that we're going to be working with a display context variable. That is, we want to have a different model for when the item is in our GUI inventory or in our hand. So the first thing we're going to do here is set our type to select, and then set our property to display context. We're going to add case, change this enum to list, and we'll set this one to GUI, add a second one, and set that one to ground. When the display context is the GUI or the ground, we're going to set our model to this item eat, and then I've named my files cookcod underscore. This case would be 2D for our GUI sprite. For the fallback, we're going to go ahead and set this type to range dispatch, because we're going to be then choosing a range, in this case of game ticks, to set our threshold for when our different frames of our animation will display. For that property, we're going to set it to use duration. And then in this case, you can leave remaining blank by not choosing false or true, and you can leave scale empty. What remaining will do, it's defaulted to false anyway, so you can imagine that basically this being there or not is the same thing. Or you can set it to true. This is whether or not you're counting up in ticks or down in ticks remaining. But in this case here, we want to count upwards from 0 to 32 ticks. So we're going to just leave this blank. We'll go ahead and add an entry. Actually, we're going to go ahead and add 4 entries because we know we're going to have 4 frames of our animation. We'll set 0, 8, 16, 24, the same as we did in our Notepad file. And then this is where we're going to go ahead and set each of these to model for the type. And then this is where you would find each frame of your animation. So we're going to go again to item, eat, cooked cod, eat 0, cooked cod, eat 1, eat 2, and eat 3. You would just replace whatever name here with whatever you end up naming your files. You just, again, have to make sure that it's following the correct file structure, and then ends with the correct name of the file that it's trying to look for. And then, just as I mentioned in Notepad+, you can add a fallback here where we'll probably want to use the final frame of our animation. This isn't completely necessary, but it does kind of help protect against any hiccups that might occur, and it might just be good habit to form. And then you can go ahead and select all of this with Control-A, Control-C to be on your copy. And this is the same thing that we wrote in Notepad, but now it's been all done for you. So now we're back here in Minecraft. If all went according to plan, you should have just been able to copy that from Misode and post it right into your Notepad+ file. And you'll see that you have the 2D sprite when you look at it in our GUI. It is a 3D model in our hand, as well as in third person and first person. And if you eat, you'll see that it'll play through the frames of our animation. If your model in-game ends up looking a little bit like this, that means that something went wrong with the JSON file trying to find the model you were looking for. So typically this looks like some kind of a spelling error, or you just used the wrong name than the one you were looking for. So again, if the model is missing, it's going to be a giant box with this missing texture on it. If your model looks correct, like you can see here that this is the silhouette of the fish model that I've created, but it's missing its texture and displaying that checkerboard of pink and black, that means that the link to the texture within the model file is what's broken. So check there to see if you have any spelling errors or are using the wrong name. Just to repeat that process and get more practice in, we're going to do the same thing now with the apple, which actually will be a little bit easier because there isn't a 3D model. It's just the same model being played in the hand versus the GUI inventory. Just like the start of our process last time, we're going to be here in Blockbench to show the different models that we have this time. However, instead of working with 4 frames of our animation this time, we're going to be working with 5. So eat 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And eat 0 will also just be used as our model for the static apple as well. So when it's in your hand and you're not eating it. So just to show those off, frame 1 is eat 0, eat 1, eat 2, eat 3, and finally eat 4. And you can actually see that I have this backwards. And these are just using Minecraft's parent-generated model, which essentially, as I mentioned in the last video where we did this, will take a 2D texture and make it into a 1 pixel thick sprite. And just to quickly show what that looks like here in Notepad, this is all you need here essentially. You have Minecraft item generated as the parent, and then you just call for the texture you're looking for, which in this case for our first frame is apple eat 0. For the rest of our frames, you would just replace this apple eat 0 with 1, 2, 3, and 4, respectively. And this is what our apple.json file inside of our items folder would look like for this case. You can see that it's a little different than the last example because we aren't using the display context, which basically means that the animation for the apple being eaten is going to look the same in the GUI as well as in your hand. If you only want your animation to play in your hand, you would mirror what we did in the first example, where you have the display context starting first. It would use the static apple eat 0 model in that case. And then you would go on to use the item use duration stuff that we did in the first example here. The only difference is that basically we're using that item duration use threshold process, and it's going to be displaying in every context for the model. Also important to note this time that our threshold is not 8 as it was in the last one because we are now working with 5 frames of animation instead of 4. So doing the same math that we did last time, the game takes 32 ticks to eat a piece of food, and with 5 frames of animation, we want to do 32 divided by 5, which gets us 6.4 game ticks. So you would want to jump up 6.4 in the threshold every time. So our first frame starts at threshold 0, apple eat 0, 6.4 ticks, apple eat 1, 12.8, eat 2, 19.2, eat 3, and 25.6, eat 4. And then on false, again, which means we're not using the item at the time, we just want to resort to using apple eat 0, which is our static apple model. So running that through in Misode one last time, we're going to go ahead and set our type to condition, with the property being using item. When we are using the item, so on true, we want to set range dispatch with the property of use duration. And then we're going to go ahead and add an entry for each frame of our animation. So again, in this case, that's going to be 5 entries. And then for each of these thresholds, we want to count out by 6.4 game ticks because again, that is 32 divided by 5 frames of animation. So we'll start at 0, 6.4, 12.8, 19.2, and 25.6. Then for each of these guys here, we're going to go ahead and set our model to type model. And this is going to be the field where we're going to fill in where our model is. So for the first one, we'll paste it in here, and it's going to be item eat apple eat 0. For our second frame, it's going to be eat 1, eat 2, eat 3, eat 4, and that should be our 5 frames of animation. Same as before, it's up to you whether you want to set the fallback. In this case, I will. Go ahead and just set it to the same as our frame 5 of our animation. So apple eat 4 for our fallback. And then we're going to deal with what happens on false, which is when the item is not being used. We want it to display a static model. So we're going to go ahead and copy this apple underscore eat 0 and change the type to model and copy and paste that in there. Basically saying when the item is not being used, we want to just display this apple eat 0 model. Go ahead and copy this into your text folder and save, and that should be all you have to do. And that is the end of our tutorial. Hopefully that should be everything you guys need to know in order to animate all of your foods. Yum, yum, yum. Got a nice tasty apple and a nice tasty fish. Very good. If you got any further questions, go ahead and feel free to leave those in the comments below. We'll be happy to answer those and clear up any confusion that you guys have. And also, I'm curious to know, would you guys be interested in more tutorials surrounding basics like using Blockbench and creating textures and things like that? Or do you want more videos specifically for these kinds of niche things? Let me know. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to give us a like and subscribe if you're not following already. We've got more tutorials like this coming, as well as a survival series that I'm playing. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.